Runway 06R. Boeing 737-800. Wind speed at the moment of takeoff, 61 knots, gusting to 78. 102 souls were on board. 19 survived. The investigation found 5 contributing factors. Not one of them, alone, would have brought the aircraft down. Together, they did. This is how it happened. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Captain Yusuf Amir was 51 years old. He had 22,000 total flight hours in his logbook. 14 of those years were spent on the Boeing 737-800. He had flown through monsoon seasons, through night approaches with low visibility, through equipment failures at cruise altitude. He was not a man who made obvious mistakes. On the morning of September 4, Captain Amir arrived at Kalra International Airport 2 hours before the scheduled departure of Flight 771. The flight was bound for Nesta City, a domestic route of approximately 680 kilometers. Scheduled block time was 1 hour and 40 minutes. He went to the Flight Operations Center first. The weather briefing that morning showed Typhoon Sarah had made landfall on the eastern coast approximately 6 hours earlier. The storm had weakened slightly during that time, but it was still a Category 2 system. Surface winds at Kalra International were reported at 280 degrees, 55 knots, with gusts already reaching 71. The forecast for the departure window, 6:30 to 7 o'clock local time, showed conditions worsening. Gusts projected to reach 78 knots. What the briefing did not clearly indicate was the crosswind component on the individual runways. The weather data was presented as a general airport wind reading. Runway-specific crosswind calculations were not included in the printed briefing sheet. This detail would later appear in the NAIB report as a procedural gap. Captain Amir signed the weather briefing form at 4:51 local time. First Officer Dana Marsh was 29 years old. She held an airline transport pilot license with 1,800 total flight hours. This was her 4th Typhoon season rotation with the airline. She had completed the airline's wet weather operations refresher course 8 months earlier. Her performance reviews were consistently above average. Her instrument approaches were rated as precise. She arrived at the gate at 5:10. Captain Amir was already there, reviewing the load sheet. At 5:22, both pilots entered the cockpit and began the standard pre-departure checklist. The checklist was completed in full. Each item was called and responded to correctly. The FDR would later confirm that all aircraft systems were functioning normally at pushback. There was no equipment fault. There was no missed checklist item. At 5:58, the ground crew disconnected the pushback tug. The aircraft was now under its own power. At 6:07, Flight 771 contacted Kalra Ground Control and requested taxi clearance. Ground Control responded, Flight 771, taxi to holding point runway 24L via Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. Hold short of 24L. Captain Amir read back the clearance. Taxi to holding point 24L via Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, hold short of 24L, Flight 771. The clearance was correct. The readback was correct. The assigned runway was runway 24L. At 6 hours 14 minutes and 32 seconds, the CVR captured Captain Amir acknowledging the taxi route verbally to First Officer Marsh. He referred to the routing as standard. She agreed. At 6 hours 17 minutes and 9 seconds, the aircraft turned onto the taxiway junction at Alpha, 3. Runway 24L required a left turn at this junction. The aircraft turned right. The right turn led toward taxiway Bravo, 7, which connected directly to the holding point for runway 06R. The taxiway signage at the Alpha, 3 junction was present and correctly posted. A blue guidance sign on the left side of the taxiway read, 24L, left. A sign on the right side read, 06R, right. The CVR does not record either pilot referencing the signage at this junction. At 6 hours 19 minutes and 44 seconds, the aircraft reached the holding point for runway 06R. The painted surface marking at the holding point read, 06R. The ILS frequency for runway 06R was distinct from runway 24L. The aircraft's navigation display, had it been cross-checked against the assigned runway, would have shown a discrepancy. No cross-check was verbalized on the CVR. At 6 hours 21 minutes and 5 seconds, Captain Amir contacted Kalra Tower and reported, Kalra Tower, Flight 771, holding short, ready for departure. He did not state the runway designation in this call. The tower controller responded. What she said, and what she did not say, would become a central point of the investigation. At 6 hours 23 minutes and 17 seconds, Captain Amir advanced the throttles. The takeoff roll had begun. Typhoon Sarah had formed in the Western Pacific 11 days before it made landfall. At its peak, it was a Category 3 storm with sustained winds of 105 knots. By the time it crossed the coast, it had weakened to Category 2. Sustained winds at landfall were recorded at 85 knots. The storm moved inland at 14 knots, which was considered a slow forward speed for a system of that size. Slow-moving typhoons produce extended periods of high winds and heavy rainfall at any given location. At Kalra International Airport, the typhoon's outer bands had been producing wind gusts above 60 knots for over 3 hours by the time Flight 771 began its taxi. Runway 06R at Kalra International has a published length of 2,650 meters. Runway 24L, the reciprocal runway on the same physical strip of pavement, is the same length, but its orientation is opposite. Runway 06R points in the direction of 060 degrees magnetic. Runway 24L points in the direction of 240 degrees magnetic. The wind at the time of Flight 771's takeoff was from 280 degrees at 61 knots, gusting to 78. On runway 24L, this wind would have produced a headwind component of approximately 53 knots and a crosswind component of approximately 31 knots. This would have been within the 737-800 certified crosswind limit of 33 knots. On runway 06R, the same wind produced a crosswind component of 34 knots. The aircraft's certified crosswind limit was 33 knots. Flight 771 attempted to take off with a crosswind component that exceeded the aircraft's certified limit by 1 knot. The controller on duty in Kalra Tower that morning was Senior Controller Petra Valdez. She had 14 years of experience in ATC. She had worked typhoon season operations at Kalra for 6 of those years. She was considered one of the more experienced controllers on the morning shift. At the time of Flight 771's taxi, Petra Valdez was managing 6 aircraft simultaneously. 3 were inbound, on instrument approaches through typhoon conditions. 2 were holding on the ground. 1 was Flight 771. At 6 hours 10 minutes and 41 seconds, 11 minutes before Flight 771's takeoff, a different aircraft, Flight 914, had contacted the tower and queried its runway assignment. Flight 914 had also been assigned runway 24L but had, like Flight 771, initially positioned towards 06R. The pilot of Flight 914 caught the error himself and asked for clarification. Controller Valdez confirmed the correct runway. Flight 914 taxied to 24L and departed without incident. The NAIB report notes the following: Controller Valdez did not issue a general advisory following the Flight 914 runway confusion. She did not rebrief Flight 771, which was taxiing simultaneously, on the correct holding point. She stated during the investigation that she assumed Flight 771 had monitored the exchange with Flight 914 and had self-corrected. Flight 771 was on a different radio frequency at that moment, the ground control frequency. The exchange between Tower and Flight 914 occurred on the Tower frequency. Flight 771 had not yet been transferred to Tower. The assumption had no basis in radio procedure. At 6 hours 21 minutes and 5 seconds, when Captain Amir called ready for departure, Controller Valdez issued the takeoff clearance. The radio transcript from the final 4 minutes before takeoff reads as follows. 6 hours 21 minutes and 5 seconds, Flight 771, Kalra Tower, Flight 771, holding short, ready for departure. 6 hours 21 minutes and 12 seconds, Tower, Valdez, Flight 771, stand by. 6 hours 22 minutes and 44 seconds, Tower, Valdez, Flight 771, winds 280 at 61 gusting 78, runway 06R, cleared for takeoff. 6 hours 22 minutes and 51 seconds, Flight 771, Amir, cleared for takeoff, 06R, Flight 771. The runway designation 06R was read back by Captain Amir. Controller Valdez did not challenge it. She had, in issuing the clearance, used the designation of the runway the aircraft was physically sitting at, which was 06R, rather than the runway to which the aircraft had been assigned. This was the point at which the error became completed and locked in. The NAIB report describes this as a compounded failure. The crew had entered the wrong runway. The controller had cleared them from the wrong runway. Neither party recognized that the runway in use was not the runway in the clearance. The FDR data from the takeoff roll provides the following. At 6 hours 23 minutes and 17 seconds, throttle advance initiated. Both engines reached takeoff thrust within 8 seconds. At 6 hours 23 minutes and 29 seconds, the aircraft had reached 60 knots ground speed. Standard procedure. The co-pilot called, 60. At 6 hours 23 minutes and 41 seconds, the aircraft reached 100 knots. The co-pilot called, 100 knots. At this point, the FDR recorded lateral acceleration indicating a left drift. The crosswind from the right was pushing the aircraft toward the left edge of the runway. The rudder inputs from Captain Amir show a correction attempt beginning at 6 hours 23 minutes and 43 seconds. The rudder was deflected to the right, toward the crosswind. The aircraft responded, but not fully. The crosswind component on runway 06R was at this moment recorded as 34 knots. Rotation speed for the 737-800 in this configuration, at this weight, was calculated at 152 knots. Due to the shortened effective runway, runway 06R was 2,650 meters in total length, but the aircraft had not started from the full threshold, the available runway remaining at the point where the aircraft needed to rotate was reduced. The aircraft began rotation at 141 knots. That is 11 knots below the calculated VR. The aircraft lifted off 340 meters before the runway end. What happened in the next 38 seconds is documented in the FDR with a resolution of 1 data point per second. The last 38 seconds, 1600 hours to 2400 hours. 6 hours 23 minutes and 55 seconds, the aircraft is airborne. Altitude, 12 feet above ground level. Ground speed, 149 knots. The gear has not yet retracted. 6 hours 23 minutes and 57 seconds, the FDR records a sudden change in airspeed. In under 2 seconds, the indicated airspeed drops by 40 knots. This is consistent with a wind shear event, specifically, a loss of headwind component. The aircraft entered a wind shear pocket at the runway end, where the Typhoon's turbulent boundary layer produced an abrupt shift in wind direction and speed. The headwind that had been partially assisting the aircraft's lift was removed almost instantly. At 12 feet AGL, with 40 knots of lift-producing airspeed removed in 2 seconds, the aircraft had insufficient altitude and energy to maintain flight. 6 hours 23 minutes and 58 seconds, the aircraft began to descend. The rate of descent as recorded by the FDR was 480 feet per minute. 6 hours 23 minutes and 59 seconds, the left main landing gear contacted the runway overrun surface. The overrun is a paved but unprepared surface extending 90 meters beyond the runway end. It is not designed to sustain the weight and speed of an aircraft under power. 6 hours and 24 minutes, the aircraft departed the paved surface at 149 knots ground speed. It entered the unprepared ground beyond the overrun area. The surface was saturated with water from typhoon rainfall. Standing water depth in this area was later measured at between 4 and 9 centimeters. 6 hours 24 minutes and 1 second, the aircraft struck the ILS localizer antenna array, a structure positioned 47 meters beyond the runway overrun. The array was a standard fixed installation, consisting of a central antenna mast and lateral support structures. The impact with the antenna array produced immediate structural failure of the left wing. The left wing separated from the fuselage at the wing root. The separation was complete. 6 hours 24 minutes and 5 seconds, 4 seconds after the wings separated, fire ignited in the left fuel tank area. The fuel, which had been a fully loaded center and wing tank system, began burning immediately. The fire spread along the left side of the separated wing structure on the ground. 6 hours 24 minutes and 9 seconds, the fuselage, now without its left wing and with the right wing producing unbalanced lift, rotated. The aircraft impacted the ground in an inverted orientation. The fuselage came to rest 280 meters from the runway threshold, inverted, partially submerged in standing water. 6 hours 24 minutes and 31 seconds, the FDR recording ends. Total time from throttle advance to fuselage coming to rest, 38 seconds. Of the 102 souls on board, 83 did not survive. The 19 survivors were located in rows 28 through 34, the rear section of the aircraft. This section separated from the main fuselage structure during the impact sequence. The separation, while catastrophic in mechanical terms, placed this portion of the cabin away from the primary fire. The rear section came to rest on its side, upright relative to its own axis, in the standing water approximately 60 meters from the main wreckage. The fire did not reach the rear section before emergency responders arrived. Cabin crew in the forward and mid sections of the aircraft did not survive. The flight deck was severely compromised. First Officer Dana Marsh was recovered from the wreckage. Captain Yusuf Amir was not among the survivors. The investigation report does not describe injuries beyond what is clinically necessary for the factual record. The National Aviation Investigation Board, the NAIB, opened its investigation within hours of the accident. The CVR and FDR were recovered from the wreckage within the first 24 hours. Both devices had functioned correctly throughout the event. The data they contained was complete. The NAIB investigation lasted 14 months. The final report identified 5 contributing factors. The report stated clearly that no single factor, in isolation, would have been sufficient to cause the accident. Each factor was necessary. All 5 together were fatal. The crew of Flight 771 taxied to and entered runway 06 when the assigned runway was 24L. The NIB found that the crew did not cross-check the runway designator markings at the holding point against their assigned runway. The standard operating procedure for the airline required a runway identity confirmation step at the holding point, in which the pilot not flying reads the runway designator painted on the surface and confirms it matches the ATC assignment. This step does not appear on the CVR recording. The NAIB report states, the crew's failure to verify runway identity at the holding point represents a breakdown in standard operating procedure that existing checklist design did not adequately prevent. Controller Petra Valdez did not rebrief Flight 771 after the runway confusion incident with Flight 914 11 minutes earlier. She assumed awareness that Flight 771 did not have. When Flight 771 called ready for departure, she issued a takeoff clearance using the designation of the runway the aircraft was physically at, runway 06R, rather than challenging why the aircraft was at the wrong holding point. The NIB found that ATC procedure at CALRA did not require controllers to confirm aircraft position against assigned runway before issuing takeoff clearance. This procedural gap existed in the published documentation. The crosswind component on runway 06 at the time of the takeoff clearance was 34 knots. The Boeing 737-800 certified demonstrated crosswind limit is 33 knots. The exceedance was 1 knot. The NAIB noted that the controller issued the clearance with the wind reading of 61 gusting 78 included in the transmission. The report found that neither the controller nor the flight crew calculated the crosswind component for runway 06 at the time the clearance was issued. Had that calculation been performed, the 1 knot exceedance would have been identified. The departure may have been delayed. 1 knot. Against a background of 5 simultaneous ATC workloads, a busy cockpit, and a Typhoon, 1 knot was not calculated. The Boeing 737-800 operated by the airline as Flight 771 was not equipped with the optional crosswind autocorrection system available for this variant of the aircraft. This system, a software-driven rudder and spoiler management package, assists in maintaining runway centerline during crosswind takeoff rolls. It does not override the pilot, but it provides corrective inputs at a speed and precision that human response cannot fully match in high crosswind conditions. The system was available as a factory option. The airline had not selected it for this aircraft or for any of its 737-800 fleet. At the time of the accident, the system was optional. It was not mandated by the regulatory authority. The airline's operations manual contained wet weather procedures and general adverse weather guidelines. It did not contain a specific checklist or procedure set for typhoon condition departures. There was no defined crosswind calculation requirement in the pre-takeoff flow for operations during named tropical cyclone events. There was no mandatory second officer verification of runway identity for typhoon conditions. 14 other airlines operating in the same regional typhoon corridor had similar gaps in their operations manuals. The CVR recording from the final moments of the takeoff roll contains one final transmission from the flight deck. At 6 hours 23 minutes and 53 seconds, 2 seconds before the aircraft lifted off, Captain Amir's voice is recorded saying, "That's not, Dana, that's." Then silence. The investigators believe these words indicate that Captain Amir, in the final seconds of the takeoff roll, recognized something was wrong. The precise nature of what he recognized cannot be determined with certainty. The NAIB's human factors team offered 2 possibilities. He may have seen the runway end markers approaching faster than expected and recognized the shortened runway, or he may have processed the crosswind drift and connected it to the wrong runway orientation. He had less than 2 seconds between those words and the moment the aircraft lifted off. There was no action available in that time that could have changed the outcome. His 22,000 hours were, in that moment, not the constraint. Time was. The NAIB published its final report 15 months after the accident. The airline was fined and had its operating certificate suspended for 4 months. During that suspension, it was required to revise its entire operations manual, implement a new typhoon condition departure checklist, and conduct refresher training for all flight crew and dispatch personnel. The airline resumed operations after passing an independent safety audit. The National Civil Aviation Authority revised its ATC procedures. Controllers working typhoon condition operations were now required to verbally confirm the aircraft's physical holding point position, by requesting the crew to state the runway designator visible from the cockpit, before issuing a takeoff clearance. This added approximately 15 seconds to each clearance exchange. It was made mandatory. At 34 airports operating in typhoon corridors across the region, runway confirmation protocols were formally updated. Several airports added additional ground-level runway designator lighting at holding points for low visibility conditions. The crosswind autocorrection system, previously optional, was mandated by 3 separate national aviation authorities within 18 months of the accident. For all Boeing 737-800 variants operating in Category 1 or higher typhoon conditions, the system became a required equipment item. Airlines operating the older variant without the system installed were given an 18-month compliance window. Boeing issued a service bulletin referencing the accident. The bulletin noted that the crosswind system's performance envelope had been validated in conditions exceeding those present during the Flight 771 takeoff roll. It did not state that the system would have prevented the accident. It stated the system would have improved the crew's ability to maintain centerline. First Officer Dana Marsh survived the accident. She was recovered from the wreckage of the flight deck. She sustained a fractured sternum and a broken left wrist. She was conscious when first responders reached her position. She was transported to the Regional Trauma Center and was discharged after 11 days. She did not return to active flying. She completed the formal NAIB interview process 8 months after the accident, once her medical treatment had stabilized. In the interview transcript, which is part of the public record, she describes the events of the morning with precision and without deviation from what the CVR and FDR also recorded. She does not add to the record. She does not subtract from it. She now works as a flight safety trainer for a regional aviation academy. She has contributed to the development of the revised Typhoon condition departure curriculum that is now used at 3 airline training centers. She has not spoken publicly about the accident beyond the official investigation process. Captain Yusuf Amir did not survive. He had 22,000 total flight hours. That number represents approximately 11 years of continuous flying, if calculated as unbroken time in the air. It represents 14 years on a single aircraft type. It represents thousands of approaches, thousands of takeoffs, thousands of decisions made correctly under pressure. 22,000 hours is the kind of number that makes a pilot a training reference. It is the kind of number that gets cited when a junior officer is nervous and a captain is meant to be reassuring. It is the kind of experience level that regulators and airlines point to when they want to demonstrate the depth of their personnel standards. It was not enough. It was not enough against a 1-knot crosswind exceedance that was never calculated. It was not enough against a taxiway turn made without a sign check. It was not enough against an assumption made on a different radio frequency. It was not enough against 38 seconds. This is not an indictment of Captain Amir. This is the record. The investigation did not find negligence. It found a set of conditions that the existing system, the checklists, the ATC procedures, the equipment specifications, the operational guidelines, was not designed to withstand. 83 people died because of 5 small failures. Each failure, taken alone, would not have been fatal. A crew that took a wrong taxiway turn, noticed at the holding point, and corrected, that is a close call, filed, reported, and forgotten. A controller who did not rebrief a second aircraft after a runway confusion, that is a procedural gap, noted in training, corrected for next time. A 1-knot crosswind exceedance on a calm day with a full runway, that is an entry in a log. A missing software option, that is a procurement decision. A checklist that did not cover Typhoon departures, that is a manual revision. 5 small things. Any one of them, alone, sends Flight 771 to Nesta City. Together, they did not. Aviation investigators call this a chain of errors. The concept is not complicated. It means that catastrophic accidents are rarely the product of one catastrophic mistake. They are the product of multiple ordinary mistakes that occur in the right, or rather, the wrong, sequence, at the right time, in the right conditions, without a single intervention that breaks the sequence. Break any one link and 83 people go home. The investigation did not find a villain. It found a system that was not designed to survive its own small mistakes. That system has since been changed. Runway confirmation steps are now mandatory. Crosswind systems are now required. Typhoon checklists now exist. 34 airports are different. That is what the 83 people left behind. If you found this documentary valuable, please subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell us which country you are watching from. This story affected aviation procedures globally, and we want to know where our viewers are. Share this video with anyone who wants to understand how aviation safety actually works, not through drama, but through detail. Every change in this industry came from someone asking exactly the questions this investigation asked.